Okay, this is Arthur Bush. You're listening to Radio Free Flint. We have Pete, a fat cat, Flanders, formerly of WTAC fame, and a legend and an icon in the Flint area for all of you who grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Peter, welcome. I can't wait to hear your stories.
Thank you, Art. It's really nice to be here with you. Boy, time goes by so quickly.
It sure does. Bill Lamb.
You know, Bill and I got to know each other later on. I knew Bill from being on the radio. He was on FDF, and FDF was kind of the old folks radio station at the time. But I got to know him later on, and we would go down into his studio and go through some of his old tapes. He was just a good radio guy, just a nice.
Sam Williams.
Sam, I worked with Sam at WHMM. Sam was Mr. Cool. He was Sweet Sam the Candy Man, and that's just what he was. But he was the smartest guy because he had a real job. Radio was not his job. Sam worked for the post office as a supervisor. So Sam would come in and do his show, but Sam also pulled a paycheck and a pension, which radio guys never got, from the government.
Don Wiggins.
Don and I are just old friends from the old days. You know, Don's been through a lot and he's come out on top, and I like Don.
With WDZZ.
Yep, Don Juan the Lover.
And he was a general manager at one point, a sales manager for Fox 66, and went on into a national market. In fact, he's still around. He lives in Florida, has a marketing company.
Oh, yes.
All right, one last one. Bob Eastman.
You know, I never worked for Bob Eastman. I almost did. When I was working at Wham, I got an offer to be Lonesome Jones on WTRX and do the overnight show. Luckily, I did not take the offer because 3 months later, they changed to middle of the road music, and I would have been gone anyway.
All right. You worked for how many radio stations?
I worked for 1 week at WAKX, the House of Wax in Duluth, Superior, Wisconsin. Came back and worked at Wham from 66 to 68, on the road with James Brown in 69, TAC 70 to 78, went on the road doing disco shows for colleges, came back and did a thing called Sock Hop Sunday Night on the Michigan Satellite Network. It was a satellite-fed program that was picked up by 20 stations across the state. We did that for 10 years. So 96 was probably the end of the radio.
You went on to work, of course, at Wham, Dave Binder and others.
You know, Binder Carter Durham, the Binder brothers, owned a part of Wham at one time. They were the big advertisers. They weren't radio guys, nice guys. Ernie Durham, who ended up being the biggest jock in Detroit on WJLB, was a part owner with Don Carter, who was the sales manager. And he owned newspapers and radio stations, and got in trouble with the government for laundering money for the apartheid government of South Africa. They made him sell all of his investments, and that's when Neil Mason came into Wham, and that's when all of us were smart and left.
It's kind of hard to work for a station whose target market is the African American community, and you're laundering money for a bunch of apartheid people.
That was the ironic situation on that one.
When you think about it, it's not funny, but it is kind of funny how stupid it is. I mean,
well, and he got away with it for a long time. The station actually traded everything out. So the station really didn't make any money other than the money they were moving through it.
Yeah.
You know, Jerry Jacobs, who was the general manager, would go to Hank Graff and get him a new T-Bird every year and trade it out to the station. I was working there, and they gave me a gas trade out so I could go buy gas. That, you know, hey, I'm a teenage guy on the radio and I got a hot car and I'm getting free gas. I'm living the big life. There was more going on before I got into radio with direct payola to the disc jockeys as far as monetary things. Marcellus Wilson, who did mornings on Wham, was actually started out as Cab Calloway's MC back in the 30s and 40s, and he knew everybody. They would send him stuff. One day he told me, my wife just called and they brought new carpet in the house. I said, that's nice. He says, yeah, the guys from the distributorship in Detroit paid for it. Marcellus was a story unto himself.
Marcellus is a part of Flint history that was Wham, which many of the younger of my listeners probably wouldn't have remembered because it sort of sunsetted, as you said, and went off into the distance. I think it isn't Wham today part of a Didn't it morph into another call letter or station?
It's a different call letter. It was purchased by a group of ministers. So now it is gospel.
Now, all of these stations, for the most part, that we've been talking about here, were on the AM dial.
AM was king back in the day. When you got into FM coming in, all of the AM stations were allowed to apply for an FM license. TAC could have had a license on the FM dial. The company that owned them at the time said, why would we? This is unproven, we don't need it. So they turned it down. That ended up going to DZZ. So, there was a time when TAC could have been a powerhouse, AM, FM combo, but they opted out because the company that owned them at the time was a trucking company, and they had 3 or 4 different broadcast entities, and they didn't much care. So they missed the boat on it.
Yeah, and that kind of revolutionized the music business, didn't it?
Well, it did, because you could play longer cuts, you could do different things. The only problem you had was it's a directional signal that is line of sight. So the FM stations, most of them at the time, didn't broadcast over a large area, whereas an AM station with the AM frequency, there were times when I would be getting letters from people in Iceland that would pick up WTAC on a good night because the atmosphere would skip the signal, thousands and thousands of miles away.
Peter, how'd you get the name Fat Cat?
When I went to work at WTAC, I was the only one that was single on the staff, and I was living the single life. And I had a friend that was a car dealer, so we were flipping cars every week and driving the best cars. And Pete Cavanaugh one day says, you're living the life of a fat cat. He says, I like that. That sounds good. He says, okay, from now on, you're Pete Fat Cat Flanders. And I'm going, oh, come on now. But it caught on, and it's followed me to this day. Later on, we went with Pete the Cat. Hey, that's how I got it. It's a Peter C thing.
Now, when would you have gotten that nickname? What year would that might have been?
Probably 71. I went to TAC in 70, so it probably would have been 71.
And I remember that all these years.
It became a moniker that has lasted through the year. I can go in and talk to somebody and they say, oh, weren't you the Fat Cat? And I say, yeah, I was back in the day. There was a time when I would have rather not have said that, but hey, it is what it is.
You said Peter C was one of the best promoters you've ever met in your life, maybe in the planet. He was a character, wasn't he? Peter C. Cavanaugh.
Peter C. was his own person. He had the foresight to see that FM was going to take over AM, and he was on an AM station. So he allowed me, because I was doing overnights at the time, to play album cuts on AM, which back in the day was unheard of. So what you really had from 7 at night until 5 in the morning was an AM version of an FM station. To have that whole idea and be able to take it and run with it and make it work, there were times in the 70s when we were doing 20s and 25s as far as the ratings, and that's unheard of. I mean, that's pretty much dominating the market. I mean, big time dominating the market.
Peter C. had a knack at marketing.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. He has a mind that is very creative, and he's able to take those creative thoughts and put them into something that people can relate to. Because I always remember the Sherwood Forest commercials, a singular point in time and space. And then he would go on to give you the rundown of who was going to be at Sherwood that time around. We had so much fun at Sherwood Forest. There's so many stories to go along with that one.
Because he had a name for everybody, but it was for a purpose.
Well, it was. We always called John Smith Mr. Goodbar from the movie Looking for Mr. Goodbar, because John was always the one who was looking for love in all the wrong places. So everybody got a nickname. It was so much fun to be in radio back then, because you could be who you wanted to be, and you really didn't have the constraints. Because Cavanaugh, we had a tight playlist, but it was never tight to the point where you couldn't do your own thing.
Some of these monikers that he came up with, people, I remember Tom Meat Mason, that stuck with me for a long time. You and Peter C., you and him got involved in promoting concerts. And one of the concerts that you and him promoted was the MC5 up in Bay City.
The MC5, the Bay City show was very tame compared to the initial MC5 show at Sherwood Forest. By the time they got up to Bay City, they had been chastised so many times and lost money for using Kick Out the Jams MF. So they had changed that down and they did the show and it was Kick Out the Jam Snicker Schnuckers. They just didn't have the edge. The first show at Sherwood Forest, that was a legendary situation between the promoter and the Davison Township Police Department.
All right. So Peter C. in his book, The Local DJ, recounts a story about you and him heading out to Sherwood Forest. Can you continue with that? I want your version. We can read Peter C.'s, but I'd like to know your version. It's a great story.
When I go through the book with Peter C., he gave me the initial 750-page manuscript. And I'm going through there and I'm thinking, some of this stuff I remember, but man, I don't remember it the way he remembered it. The Sherwood Forest story, we were all at Sherwood Forest for the MC5. We knew that there could be a problem. Their contract called for them not to use profanity or they wouldn't get paid. They were partying backstage very heavily. There was also a concert going on at the Knights of Columbus Hall in Davison with the Royal Guardsmen, Snoopy and the Red Baron. And Mike Gaylord was putting that show on. So Peter C. says, well, come on, Pete, we're going to go over, let's take a run to Davison and see what the crowd's like over at the KSC Hall. So we leave. Johnny Irons, his partner that was doing promoting with him, was there to do the show and was told that, if they say anything bad, you got to stop the show. You got to take them off. So we go to Davison. There's nothing going on. I mean, there's like 10 cars in the parking lot. On our way back, we see all these cars coming down Richfield Road. And Peter C. says, this doesn't look good. There's something going on. So we get out there and of course, all the lights are on, all the kids are leaving. The cops are hassling the kids. The cops are hassling the band. Johnny Irons is irate. And Johnny had a temper. You could get irate. Cavanaugh goes in and tells them that, what are you doing? And it was closed down. They used obscenities. And Boyce, who was the chief of police, was there. And they got into a good confrontation. Later on, though, everybody made up and life went on. But that night, I've never seen Peter C. or Johnny as irate as they were. So that's how it came down on my end of it. All I did was drive the car.
I want to read from the book that talks about this incident from Peter C.'s colorful description of it. Peter C. in his book, Local DJ, describes the encounter as follows. Even as Flanders and I were only seconds away from Sherwood Forest entrance drive, the trigger was pulled. And right now, it's time to kick out the jams, motherfucker. Obscenity, 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 they said. Motherfucker, I got that on tape. Did you get that, motherfucker, all right? Go, 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 go. 50 helmeted, riot-geared township police officers rushed through the front door at Sherwood Forest and worked their way slowly toward the stage. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. What was this? Part of the show? Heavy. The band finally saw the cops heading in their direction. As one, they collectively flashed a simple, solidified, and unified vision. Not up the revolution, not fuck the pigs, not power to the proletariat. The united thought was something much more personally powerful. We're holding to the uninitiated, in this context, means having illegal, controlled substances on our immediate persons. The MC5 was not interested in taking on the establishment, fighting for human rights and freedom for the oppressed, or upholding the sacred revolutionary codes by which they lived and for which they played. Their entire life philosophy and sole purpose on the planet instantaneously transformed into but a single ambition. The MC5 finished Kick Out the Jams with 55 seconds to spare. Other than Rob Tyner, who was spending the night in town with several Flint friends, they thanked everyone for coming, and they were out the door in their van, hurriedly headed to Ann Arbor. They were almost gone in less time than you could say motherfucker. Go, go, go. So that's Peter's version of the
Oh,
story.
yeah. Peter is very good at his descriptions, which go on and on and on and on.
Yeah. Now, Pete, you also did other promotions at WTAC at Sherwood Forest. Tell me your recollection of that.
Actually, Sherwood Forest was pretty much Peter C's thing. Anything I did was really earlier when I was at WHAM. I was with a friend, Larry White, who owned a piece of the rock in the giant ballroom. And he and I would promote black shows with artists out of Detroit and a lot of the touring artists. We did a lot of shows with Jackie Wilson and all of the great people that were the 60s and early 70s R&B people. I found that promoting was not really my forte.
Now, you've been involved with various artists in the industry, some extremely well known by history, and some even maybe in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Junior Walker and the All-Stars, Jackie Wilson, any others?
The list goes on and on as far as black artists, because every week we'd have a black artist. We did a lot of shows with Bobby Blue Bland, B.B. King, Edwin Starr, Junior Walker and the All-Stars, Temptations. Of course, Jackie Wilson. Jackie was my favorite. I love Jackie. Just really anybody that was on the circuit. You have to understand that the black artists were not making money from the record labels. Record labels would tell them, you want royalties? Screw you, royalties are mine. You want to make money, get on the road and do the shows. So it was kind of like the Chitlin Circuit type thing of the 50s. And they all came in with the attitude of, hey, I'm here to do my job. It's not a star thing. The people I got into, the white acts in the 70s, that was a whole different ball game because they all figured they were rock and roll gods. The black artists were just down to earth. But we did so many shows. It just, if I was to make a list, I'd have to get with Larry. It would just boggle my mind to remember all the people. But each one had their own little story,
You spent a lot of time with James Brown.
I did almost a year with the James Brown organization. I had gotten fired from WHAM. In fact, in radio, getting fired was just a rite of passage. Pretty much you got fired from all the stations. Because they changed format, they would do something different. So we went down to see Mr. Brown down in Pontiac. We're backstage, and I had known his road manager for the Midwest, a fellow by the name of Casablanca Sanford. So Casablanca was back with Mr. Brown. They were discussing the show. I get a call. Guy sticks his head out the door and he says, Mr. Flanders, Mr. Brown wants to talk to you. And I'm thinking, holy shit. So the guy looks at me and he says, you must be the pilot. He says, because Mr. Brown's got a white pilot. And I said, no, I'm not the pilot. So we're backstage. He says, I heard you got fired from your job. He said, you want me to buy that radio station? I says, it's not really that big a station. Probably wouldn't really be in your portfolio to buy it. He said, I can buy it and you can run it. I said, no, I didn't want to run a radio station. He says, okay, get a hold of Speedy Brown down in Cincinnati. So I do. Cincinnati is distributorship for King Records. They said, do you want to go on the road as a front man? A front man goes in before the show to make sure everything is set with the venue, pretty much to be a white face for the company. At that time, at every show, they would have concessions. They would sell albums. And Speedy Brown was head of distribution. So my job was to go in, make sure they had the local vendors set up so that they could do the selling of the product. So I would always be a day ahead of the show. So I wouldn't see the show that often unless they were doing 2 or 3 days. But it just got to be a grind. Everybody was great. And I just decided that I wanted to get back on the radio. So late 69 into early 70, I was back in Flint.
And where did you land?
TAC, got a call from Peter C. And he says, we need somebody to do summer relief. I said, okay. I said, I'll send you over a tape. He said, why the hell are you sending me goddamn tape? He said, I've been listening to you for the last 3 years on the radio. I said, okay. I mean, the thought of Peter C listening to Wham during that period of time. Kind of boggled my mind anyway. So I went to work there, and I was taking Johnny Iron's place when he went on vacation. Well, lo and behold, while Johnny's on vacation, he gets touched by God, and he's a Christian, and he can't come back and play the devil's music anymore. So Peter C. says, well, he says, seeing as Johnny has gone to God, he says, do you want to work full time? I said, oh, yes. I'd always wanted to work at TAC. Working at TAC was the epitome of working in Flint radio. They were the station. I mean, working at WHAM was great. I loved WHAM, and culturally, it gave me a whole different view on life. But TAC was where you wanted to be. So I started at TAC, and you got to put 90 days in before the union, you're certified and you're in. So Charlie Spites, the general manager, comes to me one day. I've been there maybe a month. He says, don't worry. He says, don't worry about your 90 days. He says, you're locked. You're here. And I did 8 years there, and 8 years in radio was like an eternity anywhere. And when they changed formats, after Peter C. left, I really didn't want to stay.
Hey there, we're taking a break. This is Arthur Bush from Radio Free Flint. I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that we now have a website. It's at radiofreeflint.media. That's www.radiofreeflint.media. There you can find our videos, our podcasting, blog posts, and a lot of information about our podcasts and our guests. So take time to stop by. Thanks. Hope you enjoy this segment. All right, we're back. This is Arthur Bush. You're listening to Radio Free Flint. I have as my guest Peter Fat Cat Flanders, famed DJ in Flint, record store owner for many years, musical memories, which we'll hopefully talk about in a few minutes. All right, so we left in the middle of James Brown. Say it loud.
Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Working for James Brown was interesting because at that time, everything was so regimented. If the guys had pants that weren't pressed, it cost them $50. If their shoes weren't shined, it cost them $50. If you missed a beat, you were gone. You were fired. They would have somebody to take your place. I've seen Mr. Brown walk up on stage and take the drumsticks from the drummer and tap him on the shoulder and sit down and finish the set playing drums. And I would talk to Mr. Bobbitt, who was the head man, and Bobbitt would say, oh man, I got to get a hold of New York and get a new drummer for tomorrow. So everything at that time with the James Brown organization was very, very regimented. And it was good because everything worked.
Yeah. Well, it obviously worked for a long time, didn't it?
It did. It did.
Yeah. Now, eventually, you got out of the record business. I mean, you got out of DJ business as such. There were a lot of joints in Flint that were.
We were getting geared up to start doing big shows for colleges as far as disco shows at the time, all across the Midwest. So we got into that. It was called Portable Party People. And we would do college, 2 of them a week, anywhere from New York to Tennessee to Virginia to Pennsylvania, all across the Midwest. We did that for a good 5 or 6 years. When we got done with that, I came back and went to work doing Monday nights, playing music at Embers Lounge on Dort Highway for Pete Fatillo. Once we got it going, he was making more money on Monday nights than he was doing on the weekends with the bars. We would have a line of people literally outside on a Monday night waiting to get in. It was. What
was the allure?
I have no idea other than it was an off night for everybody. And it all of a sudden became the gathering place to be on a Monday night. And we did that for 3-4 years. I was making a whole whopping $150 a night. So one night I went into Pete and I said, hey, Pete, you're doing really well. You're making lots of money. Oh, I make no money. I says, come on, you're making lots of money. Let's go up to $200 a night. I'm not going to pay you $200 a night. I said, okay, then I'm not going to be here next Monday. So that was the end of that. I went over and did a little bit over to Mr. G's over on Saginaw Street. Did some stuff at Mr. Gibby's. Had some of my guys working at Gibby's, doing the music at Gibby's. Working in the bars, just, you know, we were doing so many weddings and parties that we really didn't have time to do it.
Now, during this time, you formed a business really that did DJ work.
Yeah, Cat and Company Entertainment. I had started doing the music for weddings. I was probably the first one in the area to do recorded music at a wedding, and it happened to be for the group, the Arbors, that had a big hit with Symphony for Susan. They were getting married. One of the guys was getting married to a girl in Flint, and I was at Hatfield's record shop working at Hatfield's, and the lady came in and said, I'm looking for a disc jockey that can play this song at my son's wedding. And I said, well, I can do that. She says, it's going to be at the Durant Hotel at whatever the uppity club was at the Durant at the time. I can't remember the name of the club, but it was very exclusive. And so I go down there and I look the place over, and it just, I'm scared, you know, that this is a big deal. I got to do this right. Well, they ended up wanting me to play all the music for the whole night. And the guys got up and lip synced and sang along to Symphony for Susan. And that started the career of doing music for weddings.
What was your favorite genre?
I was always an R&B guy, you know, even when I was on TAC. One of the reasons I was hired at TAC is I knew Black music. And Peter C. wanted to get more Black music in the mix at the station, but none of the guys knew the music well enough. So we did a lot of oldies at TAC, and he would tell me, just bring in whatever you want. You know, I trust you, you know, just bring in, if it was a hit on Wham, you can play it over here. Well, that gave me a lot of leeway. And through the time I was at TAC, I had no restrictions on what I played. I mean, if I didn't want to play a slow song, which I hated the slow songs, I would just play an oldie, or I would play an up-tempo song. So
now, over the years, I mean, you've listened to so much music as a professional. Do you have any favorites, personal favorites?
You know, personally, I go back to Jackie Wilson because I had a lot of shows and a lot of connection with Jackie. And as far as entertainment and voice, Jackie was the Black king of rock and roll music and whatever. Bad management, drugs, lifestyle got the best of him, but I just loved his music.
Now, you moved on eventually as the industry changed to digital. Eventually, I mean, it was a slow creep away. I mean, first we had the 8 tracks, then we ended up with cassettes, or maybe the other way around.
Well, you're right. 8 tracks first, cassette second.
And then, you know, we started listening to Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix on that recorded music. And then we moved to the disco period, which you've just described. And then we got to the 80s, the Bee Gees and others.
You know, by the time we got to the 80s, I was into the record shop, but mostly what we were selling was older music. And really the 80s to me, just, it was there. We started a show in 85 called Sock Hop Sunday Night. And it was a satellite program that was broadcast across the state to 20 stations. But it was an oldies program. It was all call in and, you know, just call in and whatever you wanted, we'd play it. So I kind of got out of the new music scene and I was into the old music scene.
And as you began to open your record store, that took up more of your business endeavor and your attention?
We were still doing a lot of parties, a lot of weddings. The record shop came by kind of as a byproduct. A friend had one in Birch Run and they were going out of business. And I said, what are you going to do with all your records? And they said, well, you know, we want to sell them. I said, okay, if I can get a good price and I can find a building, maybe I want to have a record shop. I had a ton of records because I'd been grabbing records from all the radio stations I worked at through the years. So I had a ton of records. So we ended up getting the building that used to be Rock and Roller Records on Dort Highway. And we moved in there and opened up on February 14th, 1984, and have been there continually since then. But we started with records.
And that store is located where?
It's on Dort Highway between Court Street and Robert T. Longway. It's next to the old Aloha Lounge, Jimmy Lum's Aloha Lounge, and just north of the Speedway gas station, half-mile north of I-69. And once we started the record shop, we had tons of records, but then we got from the records, we had to transition over into tapes and then transition into CDs. And so the records kind of went by the wayside. Now CDs are going by the wayside and we're back into records.
Now, did you save those records in an old warehouse someplace and just set them aside, or what happened?
Pretty much not, because when we got to the point they weren't selling, we ending up giving a lot of them away or just letting them go for, 10, 15, 20 cents a piece.
Now, the name of your business?
Musical Memories, which is exactly what it is, because we have music and the people that come in always have memories of the old days in Flint.
Now, as I read the reviews about your business and articles and the interviews that you've given in the past, people describe this as a completely eclectic business at a record store. They describe it as different than, like, the young man that I read earlier to you. He described it as like not even an old school record store. And it's almost as if you curated this music in a way that would be like, oh, I never heard that before. That's pretty good. Is that on purpose?
Well, I don't know if it's on purpose. It's just the way I look at music is you hear the same stuff every day, but there's so much music that you need to hear. And there's so much music that may have been a minor hit that just went by the wayside. So the music that we play at the shop is a lot of the eclectic older stuff that maybe you haven't heard before. And when the kids come in with the attitude of, I'm going to hear something different, or I'm going to try to find something different.
How many records do you think you have in your store?
Yeah, we took 300,000 45s out and put in a warehouse. Probably on site, we probably got 20,000, 25,000 45s. At one time, we were up to 15,000 albums on site. Now we're probably at maybe six to 10,000.
Is there a market today for 45s?
It's a tough market. There are certain 45s that have a lot of value, mainly to the English market. It's called Northern Soul. A lot of the little labels out of Detroit. As far as 45s, it's tough. Right now we're running a sale, 50 cents a piece on 45s. And I've got guys coming in buying, 200, 300 45s.
Oh my.
But it used to be I could sell 45s on a regular basis. Now it's maybe a couple guys a week at the most. We used to sell a lot of 45s to the English guys that would come over and go through the shops and look for stuff. I would have 2 or 3 English guys a year, 3 or 4 Japanese guys a year. They just come over here and they go through our shops and send the stuff back home and make money.
Do you sell your records mostly through people who just stumble into your shop, or do you sell them online?
I do some Discogs, I do some eBay, but 80% is through the door. And I like it because it's the personal touch of having the people come in and relating to them. And a lot of them just come in and just hang out. I had some guys the other day that came in, there was 4 of them, and they're sitting there. One of the guys is looking at CDs and records, and the other ones are just sitting there talking. And I walked over to him and I said, okay, guys, this isn't the barbershop. Somebody's got to buy something. And they started laughing. He says, we figure it is like the barbershop. We can come in here and reminisce. I said, hey, sit there and reminisce all you want, because that's why we're here.
And that's got to give you a good feeling.
It does. It's a community feeling. It's everybody that comes in is a friend. I have no problem with anybody that comes through the door.
Now, you've been in business in the Flint area as this record store for how many years did you say?
What is it, 36 now, 37?
Well, Flint's a difficult place to do business, but somehow you've survived it.
We survived it because we have good customer base and they always come back. And they understand that you got to support the local guy. If you don't, where are you going to get your music?
Good point. Well, let's close out on a more personal note. Where were you raised? I mean, what do you consider your hometown besides Flint?
No, Flint's my hometown. I'm an East Side boy. I grew up on the East Side on Indiana Avenue off of Kersley Park. Went to Homedale, Whittier, and Central. Went to Flint Junior College for a minute, trying to get out of the draft. Went to Career Academy before went on the radio. Career Academy of Broadcasting was a 4-month mill to get you a certificate and a job on radio.
Yeah.
And I graduated valedictorian, so I got the only rock and roll job. The rest of it was all corn-fed, doing the pigs reports in the Midwest. And that's how I ended up at WAKX up in Duluth Superior for a moment. And I mean, it was a quick moment.
Now where'd you get this interest in music that's driven your whole life?
When I was a kid, I always was fascinated with how you could listen to music coming through the air. My father got me a little transistor radio. So I would walk around and that transistor radio with a little ear thing in my ear was with me 24/7, even at night. And I was known as the radio boy in the neighborhood. Oh, here comes the radio boy. And at night, I was really intrigued because you could go up and down that AM dial and you could get stations from all over, because at night the signal on AM went further. So I would get on WLAC down in Nashville. During the day, they were the most country station in the world. At night, they were the blackest station you could ever listen to. And I always thought all of these disc jockeys were black guys. Come to find out, they were all white guys. So when I went on Wham, the same thing happened to me. Everybody figured I was black. So when I would go and do a show down at the Piece of the Rock with Larry and MC the show, they'd get this attitude of, who the heck is that on that stage? And then I'd tell them and they'd all go, huh? So
did you have a...
You know, Marcellus did mornings, I did middays, Tony King did afternoon, Sam did sign off. And that was pretty much, you know, the whole thing.
So you spent your whole life in Flint.
Well, yeah, been here all my whole life.
How many years is that?
It'll be 74 coming up next month.
Flint's a unique city, kind of place where there's always been the ups and downs.
Oh, yes.
How would you describe the city to a total stranger?
If they came into Flint right now, I would say, don't judge Flint by what you see. Judge Flint by what we are. I was here for the heyday of the 70s when everybody was making big money. Back in the 60s, I was making $5 an hour working at Wham. The guys in the shop were making $2 and some cents. So I was king, you know. When you got into the 70s, the auto worker in Flint was the highest paid auto worker in the world. When you get into the 70s and 80s, everything on the decline, General Motors leaves, the infrastructure falls apart, but the people still stay here and the people are still strong.
The question I have is, what are the people of Flint?
Right now, it's a very diverse population. It's hard for me to gauge because I pretty much deal with the older people in Flint in my business. But as far as staying in Flint, I'm still here.
A lot of people say they're Flintstones. Are you a Flintstone?
I'd have to be because I've been here all my life.
What's a Flintstone?
A Flintstone is a person that is from Flint.
Is there a trait or a characteristic of those of the city?
Well, you've got to have tenacity because you can't be here unless you can take care of the struggles that are going on. And we've had more struggles than probably any other city in the United States with the water crisis and everything else. But people remain here and people are strong here and people continue to live their lives the best they can.
You've been successful by a lot of measures. One, you've been able to spend an entire career following your passion, which is music. Not a lot of people get to.
You know,
do that.
Art, I've never had a job. I've never had a job. Every time I have worked someplace, it has been a passion, and I never looked at it as a job.
And what was it that Flint did for you to make you that successful, if anything?
Supported me all through my radio career, all through anything else we did. The record shop. Cavanaugh and I used to joke because we'd go back and forth on who was the best disc jockey or who was the most popular disc jockey in Flint.
Who was it?
So they would have contests, and he would win some and I would win some. And we would go to condos and drink about it and laugh about it. But everybody was so supportive through the years. And my family was very supportive too. You know, I've never looked at it as a job.
Pete Flanders, thanks for joining me and for giving me your time so generously. You're a treat and a treasure of our city. And I'm proud to have known you and listened to your music.
We've been friends a long time. Thank you for having me on, but it just took you too long to do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Art.